So once again, welcome everyone to our Wellness Wednesday webinar. So this is episode 2, the first being last Wednesday. And I thank you all for taking the time to join us, to being with us, despite this ungodly hour in the morning. And so I'd like to begin this Wellness Wednesday with a simple prayer. Let's be aware of where we are now, of how we feel, of the thoughts in our minds before we begin the day. We find ourselves on another Wednesday morning as we begin a day of work, of spending time with friends, and anticipating the experiences to come. We begin our prayer in the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, we thank you for this brand new day to make you known and loved. Lord, as we begin this Wellness Wednesday session, we pray for openness, we pray for honesty, and we pray for the grace to be willing to look within, to be self-aware, ultimately to know how to conduct ourselves and how we treat other people as well. Lord, guide us, move us. We thank you, we love you. Amen. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. So once again, everyone, welcome to Wellness Wednesday. Our speaker for this morning is no stranger to us. We are once again blessed to have Miss Joey Umandap to share with us important insights and tips on how we can continue to be tenacious or resilient in these challenging times. A management graduate who relished the exciting world of marketing. Certain experiences and key realizations in her life have made Miss Joey reevaluate her career path and turn to the even more fascinating world of psychology. She is now a licensed psychologist, practicing assessment, therapy, and training. She works at the Bulatao Center for Psychological Services and at the Ugat Foundation, an organization with psychospiritual interventions for grassroots families, both based at the Ateneo de Manila University in Quezon City. She is also involved in developing programs and modules and facilitating workshops for marriage and family therapy, personal growth, mindfulness, and self-compassion. So, JNG, without further ado, let us welcome back Miss Joey Umanda. Good morning, Miss Joey.
Okay, good morning, Jello. Good morning, everyone. So it wasn't like last time where I could see everyone's faces, but I hope you're all doing okay and having a good start to your day. So we'll begin with the slides now, right? I'll start sharing.
Yes, ma'am. You may
So,
share your screen.
okay, I apologize in advance if some of the slides reads like a lecture. Those are a bit like cognitive theories, but I hope to give practical and real life examples to make it clearer for you. And if you have any questions, just let me know as well. So here, let's see. Our talk for today is about bravery in the face of crisis. Because now basically it's a crisis. Whatever you say or however we describe it, this is a global crisis. It's a pandemic, and with it comes a lot of fears. And we have to overcome certain challenges. Like right now, the logistical challenge of getting to work is more difficult compared to before when it was already difficult. Now, with all the safety measures in place, it takes a bit longer. And I think a lot of us can attest to that or can relate to that. And then there are even more challenges when it comes to doing the day-to-day things that were so easy for us before. Now there's an added layer of uncertainty, and there are added concerns or things we have to account for that we didn't have to do before. So, just a brief overview of what we'll be discussing today. The first is our experience of crisis. The next topic will be on facing challenges beyond our control. And the last would be facing challenges within our control. So, on our experience of crisis, or not just crisis perhaps, but also when it comes to negative emotions or emotions that tend to overwhelm us or drain us, there are two emotional experience scales on this slide. One is definitely different than the other. One is showing a sad face and one that's stressed or anxious, and another shows a calm face and someone that is relaxed or perhaps experiencing a pleasant emotion. What difference do you think? What do you think is the difference between these two scales, given that one is doing much better relatively compared to the other? So some of you may already be answering in front of your own cameras or screens. The difference is that in the first scenario, when one is experiencing a lot of stress or is overwhelmed by negative emotions, there tends to be a lack of poor coping or resources and skills. So the more stress we experience in our day-to-day lives, ideally, we also have coping skills and resources to counteract that. If we don't have enough, the tendency is we will be overwhelmed. However, if we have adequate or strong coping skills, it would be a good way for us to uplift our mood and to help us navigate the challenges that we're facing. A quick, like simple coping tip to just let you know or allow you to check in on what your experience is, right? Some people tend to not have that awareness, or they notice at the end of the day, oh wow, that was a pretty stressful experience. But if you feel that you have to check in on yourself, and this is pretty helpful, it's a quick mindfulness coping tip. What we first do is we slow down, we take a time out, just pause, be still, calm your body, and notice the thoughts that are coming in or that are attacking you. And then next, we orient ourselves. Let's try to bring our mind and body back to the present time and place. So you're already late for work, you're still lined up at the elevator, and you won't be able to get in the lift for a bit. Just notice where you are. Okay, there are a lot of people there, and I just have to calm down. I will be late, yes, but there's nothing much I can do about it except like wait and line up, right? And then self-monitor. Use a scale to assess your level of distress. You can say, okay, right now I feel like a 3. I'm relatively calm because I know there's not much I can do about it. Or you can say, oh no, I still have to do this. I still have to file this paper. I still have to get someone's signature before I can start work. And you can label that experience accordingly. You don't have to change your experience in any way with this coping tip. It's just a matter of checking in with yourself and gaining a bit more self awareness. And then the problem solving, the coping can come after. Right now, what's important is to acknowledge your experience as it is. So, what about the coping and resourcing skills that we talked about, right? In psychology, coping and resourcing is like a first aid kit. It's like your mental health toolkit. And you see these little symbols here. There are coping skills, various coping skills that we could employ whenever we experience negative emotions or when we feel like when we're dealt with a lot of challenges. What's important is that you know your strengths and weaknesses and that you have the proper tools. Now, with these coping skills, psychologists would recommend that you have a repertoire or a full set of them. If you tend to rely on just one coping skill or just two, and there's an inflexibility, rigidity about it, it's constraining and not as expansive. So the tendency is it becomes maladaptive. However, if you have like a healthy set of coping and resourcing skills, it's more ideal because you can engage in the coping skill that would be helpful for you. And after engaging in that activity, now you can problem solve and work on that emotion, how to not only address that emotion, but perhaps get to the root of the problem as well. This is actually a worksheet that we use with some clients. who have difficulty identifying their coping skills or have to gain a certain awareness of which coping skills could be helpful or could be detrimental for them. I We won't have time to do this ideally, but you'll get the slides, and you if you want to do this, it's also good with children and adolescents. It's also helpful with them, and it just helps us, get an overview of what we tend to do and gain a bit more self-awareness. So distraction would be those skills and techniques that are helpful from distracting you from irrational thoughts or challenges. Grounding would be a way to anchor yourself in the present moment and keep your mind focused on the present. Emotional release, as the name says, includes cathartic actions that can help you vent. While self love allows you to take care of yourself or nurture yourself by having a relationship with yourself or showing yourself kindness and compassion. Thought challenge, it's a cognitive behavioral technique, and it's some ways you can challenge negative and unhelpful thoughts, and you can change these with more positive and helpful thoughts. While lastly, accessing your higher self are techniques and activities that can help you feel like your best self. So it's more outward oriented. I'm sure a lot of you have quite a lot of skills already in this regard, but you might also notice that there are pros and cons. We'll go over this one briefly because we don't have a lot of time, but these are some examples of distraction coping skills or techniques that you can use to cope when you're faced with a challenging situation. I'd just like to remind you that these are not problem solving skills, these are coping techniques. The problem solving comes after, when the emotion or that overwhelming sense of just being unable to act is present. But later on, the problem solving still has to happen. So distraction is, as the name says, just basically directing or diverting your attention to something else. The pros are it would give your mind and heart a break. It's good for short term relief and just helps you get through a crisis, particularly those that you can't do anything about. So while waiting in line downstairs to get to the elevator, perhaps you can start on responding to certain messages, checking your mail, or even just going on social media to do something else or just be purposeful about that moment without waiting too anxiously. The con of this coping skill is that you can't do it for too long because it does not solve or resolve underlying issues. Grounding would be mindfulness, as we discussed like a month ago in our workshop, right? It's a mindfulness technique where you can just use your senses and focus on the present moment. The pros of this is that it tends to reduce the physicality of anxiety. So if you feel anxiety too much in your body, it allows you to focus on other senses that may be helpful. And it could just bring you back to the present moment. However, sometimes it helps to stay dissociated. For example, if you are in a crowded, well, this was pre-pandemic, if you were in a crowded like LRT, I don't think it might be too helpful for you to ground yourself, particularly when you have to notice that so many people are pressing up against you, the place is tight, and you find it difficult to breathe, right? So that it might be more useful to dissociate or just distract yourself during those times. For emotional release, it's allowing yourself that cathartic moment to just release that emotion. So a lot of you are already familiar with this, I'm sure. It's great for anger or fear. It releases the pressure of overwhelming emotions. Sometimes a good cry is just what we need. However, it is difficult to do in every situation. It will be weird and inappropriate, particularly if you do it in public spaces. So there's an ideal time and place for these coping techniques or skills. What about self-love? I think a lot of people tend to have the misconception about self-love because many believe it's about indulging yourself or spoiling yourself or treating yourself to something nice. And while that's not entirely untrue, I think self-love is has a bigger scope than that. It's doing the difficult things that you know are also good for you in the long run, such as perhaps having just a bit of that cake instead of a big slice, or doing your work now instead of cramming it all later on. That's a form of self love as well, because you're doing things you need to do that you know are also good for you. And at the same time, it's having a relationship with yourself. When you have a relationship with someone, you don't just give each other gifts. You also help each other become better people, right? And you also treat each other with kindness and respect. And that's a self love that we're talking about here. Some pros, it helps become your best friend. You deserve it, and it's great for guilt or shame. However, it sometimes feels difficult to do, and it may feel superficial because some of us tend to motivate ourselves by criticizing ourselves, and a lot of people don't feel too good about this. And yes, the restrained or constrained conceptualization of it may lead to too much self-indulgence, such as retail therapy, or just overeating perhaps, or having watching too many Netflix shows even. With thought challenge, you could actually have like a long modular workshop about this, but at the simplest level, thought challenge and CBT is just addressing your negative thoughts. And it's a Socratic challenge, like really debating and saying, okay, this thought is not true. I'm late for work again. I'm such a failure. Or I'm late for work again. Nobody, no, everyone's going to get mad at me. No one will like me anymore. Underneath all our many thoughts are basic thoughts that lead to our self concept. And thought challenge allows us to basically refute these and give us more space to improve, right? By allowing us a bit more, I guess, more realistic and action oriented thoughts to work with. So, what Thought Challenge does, it helps shift negative thought patterns or cognitive distortions, those thinking patterns that may not be very helpful. And trying to be more logical may help reduce intense emotionality. So, when we're faced with a difficult situation, just basically being logical about it helps us cope better. The more emotional you feel, however, the harder it is to do. So if you are too emotional, too overwrought with, say, anger or fear, anxiety, perhaps it might help to engage in another coping skill, because the tendency is, if you engage in thought challenge during these times, rumination will happen instead. So that negative emotion will persist because you tend to have thoughts that will just contribute to these emotions that you feel. Also, feelings of shame can make this difficult. So in this instance, perhaps some self-love techniques could help, or if you're more emotional, emotional release or distraction could also help. The last of the coping skills would be accessing your higher self. It's just having a more outward orientation. When the tendency is, when we're overwhelmed with negative emotions, we tend to focus in on our experience. I'm angry, I'm upset, this person did this to me, and we're allowing that to fester inside us. One way of addressing this, particularly if we can't do anything about it now, is that we could just direct our attention outside, right? We could help or compliment someone. Just be kind, volunteer, do something for others, and this is already helpful. And it allows you to remember that everybody has value, not just yourself. Everybody is going through something, and then purpose can be found in small and big things. Even if it's just a smile in someone at the waiting line, that's already a good thing. Or not even, or you already know you're late, but not cutting in, that's already an act of kindness if it's something that's commonly done. And it just spreads a bit more joy and happiness all around, and makes an unpleasant experience less so. However, some people, and yes, this does happen, may lead to this, tend to just focus outwardly and tend to disregard their own needs. And people, particularly in the helping profession, they tend, there's a tendency to do things out of love, not for love. And this is something that we just sort of have to nuance, so we know our own motivations for helping other people. So, what are the paths to self care and well being given these challenging times we're experiencing? It's a host of these physical, mental, psychological, spiritual, professional, relational, and emotional techniques. It's sort of like a recategorization of what the coping skills that we discussed earlier. We can have spiritual activities that can help nourish us, relational techniques that can help nourish us or help us cope. What's important is that it's balanced. Because yeah, if we tend towards something too much to the fact that we disregard other aspects, then that's when it tends to become unhealthy. Those are the moments when we will lose our footing and be unable to deal with the many challenges facing us. What about those challenges beyond our control then? Now that we've discussed ways to cope when we're experiencing challenging times, what happens when these challenges are beyond our scope, right? Some things that we can't do anything about. The Serenity Prayer is one great answer to this. And I think a lot of us have faced are familiar with this already. I remember seeing this earlier, even when I was a child, and I would see it everywhere, so much so that much like all of you, or most of you, you probably memorized it already. We have to be able to differentiate between those things that we can change and those things that we have to learn to accept. And mindfulness is one way of being able to accept this. Mindfulness basically is a practice of paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment, and it's non judgmental. This is the definition of mindfulness that is commonly used. And well, I guess what's important is to note that we can engage in mindfulness not just through meditation, not just through formal practice, but also in certain times of the day when we do those breathing techniques, when we mindfully do our work, when we mindfully pray, or when we mindfully talk to someone or converse with someone, even just focusing our attention on that person. Um, Several key concepts of mindfulness that you may find helpful is that it is intentional. You just don't just do it unthinkingly. You do it purposefully. You do it voluntarily and willfully. It has to do with the present moment. It allows you to suspend judgment and instead of judgment, act with more openness and curiosity. So when someone comes in late for work, not just say, ano, you woke up late again. You say, oh, what happened this time? How come you're late? There's more, it just opens a space for conversation instead of being too judgmental already. Um, what is mindfulness then? I think I made a mistake with the titles. I'll correct that later. The title of this one is Mindfulness, while the title of the next slide is Modes of Mind. And there are two modes of mind basically that are open to us now or that we tend to engage in. The first is the doing mode, which a lot of us are very aware of or are normally always on. It's when we function on automatic pilot. When you leave for work, when you're getting ready for work, you get up, do your morning ritual, perhaps have breakfast, get in the car, or and then drive to work, right? These are things that you tend to do automatically. Sometimes it's when you do your work, if you know it so well already, it's automatic. It's when we relate to our experience via thinking. So our minds are always working at this time, and it allows us to work on the past. Okay, this is what happened before, I can't do it now. Or what's happening in the future, I have to plan, I have to organize this. After doing this task, I have to take care of this task. However, this is also our tendency to escape, avoid, or correct an unpleasant experience. If you notice, many people are averse to negative experiences and would rather go towards positive experiences. So if you notice that it's traffic in this lane, you'll tend to veer to the other lane because it would be a less unpleasant experience for you. Or if you notice that sometimes when there's this pile of work to be done, we tend to say, okay, I'll do that later. I'll focus on this easy task first. Some of us have that doing mode in us. And because it's more action oriented, we need things to be different from what they are. So there's always an aspect of having to change things. However, with mindfulness, it's allowing ourselves to just engage in that mode of being. It's relating to our experience via sensing, and it's accepting and approaching unpleasant experiences. So perhaps in that elevator, waiting for the elevator to arrive or waiting in line to get to the office, just saying, oh, okay, I'm stressed right now because I'm late again and I have work to do. I have so many things to do. Um, and I just feel really uneasy right now, and I can feel it in my chest or my hands are tight. And it's just noticing that, just being aware of that, and giving yourself that pause to allow this emotion to sink in, these sensations to be acknowledged before perhaps we get on or we move on with the rest of our day. It's sort of like saying hi, not to the security guard or not to the messenger, but to that to someone who we don't really relish seeing every day, and just saying, okay, hi, still. We still acknowledge that experience. And I think that's important because instead of resisting it, we allow it to be. And we acknowledge, okay, it's not easy for me to say hi to that colleague of mine, but it's only polite to do so, and perhaps I can. And perhaps, or if that colleague is someone you've had a rift with before, it's something worth talking about now, without forcing yourself to, of course. If you notice that you're still not on good terms, say, okay, I'm uneasy about coming face to face with this person. What do I need now? And we'll do that later on with learning from failures. Given that mindfulness is one technique that we can use if it's beyond our control, what about those things or those situations within our control? So forgive me, this is the bit where it sounds like a lecture. Just bear with me for a bit, and if you have any questions, let me know. Um, what's important, like in this image, is a child operating a switchboard. So, in any case, being faced with a switchboard, like a challenging switchboard, a metaphorical switchboard in our lives, is something that would be difficult to do. But how do we attempt to decipher which controls to push or to fiddle with whenever we need to do something in our lives? So given the many coping skills that we learned, how do we learn to master it, right? um if we don't know anything about it, then we'll be fearful of it. So for, I guess, for me, one of the ways we can overcome challenges or deal with challenges with more courage is to learn about it. With our emotions, if we dislike being fearful or anxious, perhaps we could first name it, label it, and learn our emotions. What is my emotion telling me, right? With these challenges, perhaps we can educate ourselves on how we can deal with it better, much like this child probably was, right? She looked so confident in dealing with it. If you could read this poem with me, it's a short poem. It's called Autobiography in 5 short chapters by Portia Nelson. And so I'll read it aloud. You can read it along with me. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes me forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. So This came from her book, There's a Hole in My Sidewalk, The Romance of Self-Discovery. And it particularly pertains to those behavioral patterns that we tend to fall into that we were not really aware of before. And if it's pattern, if it's a pattern, if it becomes compulsive, then perhaps something needs to be done, or we need to do something for that pattern to stop happening. But before we can begin to do that, we still we still have to be aware of it. And as you notice, it's also a process. So perhaps you can think of a behavior you tend to do, or tend to engage in, and it's not really helpful most times, and just sort of check in with yourself, which chapter am I in this part of me, right? Or and what do I want to do about it? And just accept that that's where you are, because wherever you are is fine. The self awareness does matter, because it's really the first step in knowing where you would rather go, or where you choose to go now. And that poem, I guess I just gave that because it links to this study on emotion regulation. And this is our ability to manage our experience of emotion in terms of intensity and duration, and to manage strategically how we express this emotion in social context. So we experience emotions all throughout the day, whether it's being bored, being calm, being elated, being happy, being sad. This is something that we have with us at every day. And when you check in with yourself now, you can probably label an emotion that you're feeling, which is why it's important when we are aware of these emotions to know how to regulate it, to express it, or to do something about it. And why should we know how to regulate our emotions? Number one, because we all have hedonistic goals. Hedonistic in the sense that we want to enhance or intensify pleasurable experiences, and to avoid or decrease emotional negative emotions or experiences. Because if it's a negative emotion, the tendency is it will also be a negative experience. So we want to experience more happy emotions, which is why we want to regulate our emotions. It also helps us achieve our objectives. When we experience sadness or fear or anxiety, even, it's because we have been dealt with the loss of an objective or the loss of a goal. Say, I want to get to work on time, but you're already late. So how do we now deal with that emotion? And this is a very textbook explanation, but it also runs us through the important concepts, I believe. What's important to note, there are individual differences in our ability to regulate emotions. However, it could be learned, and sometimes these attempts to self-regulate could be maladaptive. So it's also important to know which strategies are working positively or negatively. So this is the process model of emotion regulation. I know that it's a bit technical. This is actually slides I used for a class for undergrads, but a lot of them also find these slides helpful. So any process in the model, there's five: situation selection, situation modification, attentional deployment, cognitive change, or response modulation. At any point in this process, we can actually find a way to regulate our emotions or address our experience, particularly if it's a challenging experience. If it's situation selection, it's as like chapter 5 in the poem, it's selecting your situation to manage your emotions. So it's approaching a situation to either experience it or avoid it. If you know that going to that restaurant would be too risky because there are too many people, then perhaps it's better to just stay in or order in. When we choose the situation, we need to weigh the short term versus long term consequences. I have so much work now. Do I have time to do it? Do I want to do it? If the short term gain is okay, fine, it will make me feel better, but the long term consequences is that it will pile up, then perhaps it's better to do your work now, right? So effective situation selection is not always easy, particularly if it's challenging. So it takes a bit of practice. In psychopathology, for people who for clinical cases already, people engage in safety behaviors. So for people with phobia, they will just avoid that thing they're afraid of, and this might not always be helpful. So in this case, it's better to deal with the problem or to select that experience. So what's also important to note here is that we can benefit for others' perspectives. Perhaps we can ask or get feedback from other people. Situation modification, well, as the name states, do something different about the situation. You're already in it, you can't do anything about it. Say for example, you woke up, well, I'll explain this later pala, I was slide on it. If you're already in the situation, you can still modify it or the external environment, so you can reduce its emotional impact or heighten its emotional impact if it's a positive experience. It's like problem focused coping. So, for example, if you're embarrassed, try to make a joke about it. Acknowledge the thing that you're embarrassed about, and just make a joke out of it. So it's also a way of being authentic. If you're particularly angry at a colleague who didn't get his or her work done, some people would it's the other way around. To avoid anger, say you submitted your work late or you made a mistake. Some people try to look sad to get a different reaction, so other people won't get mad at them. And that's not such a, it's a younger way of dealing with things instead of acknowledging it. But you have to admit sometimes you do this. Or to avoid anger, we already try to appease the person by doing things that they'll approve of. If this task is stressful, like your job is, that task is particularly tedious or difficult to get through, you can make a fun game out of it. Okay, I'll encode or I'll read these reports. I'll read 3 reports and see if I can do it within 30 minutes. So just make a game out of it. Just make it a more interesting challenge even. Attentional deployments, it's deploying your attention to other things. So just to reduce the intensity of that painful emotional experience. So we can distract ourselves, as was in the coping skill earlier. Rumination, when we focus on the cause of the stress. This is what I talked about earlier, and it is definitely maladaptive because it doesn't lead to problem-solving behaviors. We could also worry and direct our thoughts and attentions to the things that could go wrong. So it allows us to plan, to mitigate risks, but too much worrying can be maladaptive and could lead to anxiety. How about cognitive change? It's like the thought challenge. But now we reappraise the meaning of an event or the situation. So we change our interpretation of it. Such as in this image, what do you see, right? Some of you will probably see a rabbit. Some of you will probably see a duck. And they're both true. So if we're seeing things one way, perhaps we could reappraise and look at it a different way. She's mad at me versus she did not see me. If someone you said hi to just looks past you, when you make a mistake, instead of saying I'm stupid, you say, oh, I forgot. Instead of saying I'll never be good at this, we can begin to think, okay, I'm not good at it yet, but I can learn this. So it's having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. It's thinking that, okay, failures are part of the situation. I can overcome this. This is just one experience. I can do something else about it. A way to engage in cognitive change is also distancing or making it more objective. So instead of being like immersed in the emotionality of the experience, we try to take a step back and think about it. And it helps us problem solve better. And sometimes, or I guess in a lot of times, humor helps. Like right now, I read the news or I become updated with the news through social media, through those in a more comedic fashion, because it helps me just become less stressful. With the news, the increasing curve, it doesn't really help. So if we inject a bit of humor in it, we still acknowledge the gravity of the situation, but it reduces the emotionality. Um, and the technique that we can use is reframing. It's a bit technical, but it's seeing the same thing, but just altering our view of it. So instead of seeing someone as seeing someone as, say, perhaps a drug addict, we see, instead of labeling someone a drug addict, we think, okay, this person is not really a drug addict, but this person is heavily reliant on substances. That shift in the label allows us to work on something more actionable. If this person is relying on substances, perhaps I can help this person look for other ways of, or for other things to rely on instead of just substances. Because if you label a person, say, a drug addict or a loser or a gambler, there's little room for action. But if you change that into something more actionable, then we can begin to acknowledge that there could be change in that other person too. The next would be response modulation. And as adults, a lot of us are more acquainted with this. So it's influencing our experience of that emotional experience so that we can calibrate it into something more appropriate for that situation. If you feel bad, perhaps you need to go out for a walk outside in the hallway to feel better or less sad. You had a fight with your colleague. Perhaps you just have to both take a step back and walk out, do other tasks to reduce the emotionality. Um, if, however, you suppress it too much, it might not be too helpful. It's okay as a coping technique for the meantime, but if you don't address that emotion, it will have cognitive and social costs. So it could be maladaptive. So if you always have a fight with this colleague, perhaps that walk might not be so helpful. It will help to find a way to communicate with that colleague so you can hash things out and come up with a solution, or reconcile even, or talk about your differences instead of just suppressing that emotion. Because also, when we tend to suppress our thoughts and emotions too much, it will have cognitive and social costs. In that sense, we won't be fully present. We won't be able to do our work well because there's something that we're trying to push down or like push back. So if you suppress anger, disgust, happiness, it allows us to be able to focus less. As they say, what we resist persists. So instead of burying that emotion, perhaps it would help to dig it up. Just look at it, honor it, acknowledge it, and then you can decide what you want to do with it instead of just disregarding it. Other ways to response modulate would be substances like taking coffee if you're sleepy, exercising, sleep, or self-soothing. So in this case, you notice it could be maladaptive as well if we tend to modulate the response too much. So given that we discussed all that, I hope I was able to explain it properly. You can do everything or select a strategy at every situation to help you regulate your experience or your emotion. An example here is you woke up late for work, situation selection. Well, you can't do anything about it now. You can say, okay, what can I do to prevent this in the future? Perhaps I can wake up earlier, or perhaps I can pass this route to work. Situation modification. Is there anything that you can cut out of your morning routine so that you can still get to work on time? And there's some helpful questions here that you can read later. I won't go over it in detail now because we're out of time and there's a bit more to discuss. But attentional deployment, how do you focus your attention? Cognitive change, how can you reframe or think about the situation differently? And response modulation, what can you do to just address what you're feeling right now? Even if it's a band-aid technique, you can address it properly later on when you're in a better frame or state of mind. And what's important in this process is that there's also a feedback loop. You can ask yourself later, did it work? What can I modify or change, or how can I address the situation better next time? And this process, this technique is particularly useful for those behaviors that we, or those patterns that we tend to fall into, repeatedly. This is, like in my students, they would say this applies to the relationships, the maladaptive and healthy relationships they can get into. And engaging in this helps them realize, oh, okay, this is not helpful for me. Or when they tend to get into fights with other people, they notice, because now you get to nuance, you get to just break down the experience and decide which helps you better, or what you can do about the situation. Because that hole in the sidewalk will not go away, right, unless someone covers it. But if it's there, it's there. And since you can't do much about it, the best thing to do would be to either walk around it or just not pass that street anymore. But how do we do it then? Like, how do we maintain courage through trying times? Given that we know those coping skills, given that we're now more aware of our emotional experience, how do we maintain courage still? Ro talks about this process, or these three aspects of being so, or staying brave. The first is self-honesty. So being able to look inward and cultivate insight. Just being honest with yourself. Why am I always late for work? Or why am I always getting into fights with my spouse? Why do I lose my temper with my children? It's just being able to look in and, seeing what is it telling me? What is this experience teaching me about myself? And being honest with yourself about it. And that's not always easy to do. Sometimes it does help to talk with someone you trust. The next is personal responsibility. So in maintaining courage, you have to take ownership of your own personal experience. And this is very different from self-blame, because self-blame is sort of like criticizing yourself to the point that you can't act on it anymore. But if you say, okay, I woke up late for work because I had to work late last night, I had to finish so many things. And it's just acknowledging that, perhaps I have to get enough rest, and I need enough rest, and I have to do something about my working style that's more helpful, or I have to tell my boss that there's just too much on my plate. I need help. Just that acknowledgement that you did something to cause this to happen allows us, hopefully, to come or arrive at more actionable solutions. The last would be self-expression. So given that you know this is how you are now, this is what you tend to do, given that you know these are the things you can do, or these are the things that you've been doing that contribute to the challenge, how do you now regain your self-agency? Like, what can I do now to take control back, to feel empowered instead of feeling tired or challenged or overwhelmed? What decisions do I have to make? And what actions do I have to engage in so that I can help myself and not allow this to happen to me all the time? And that's basically the talk. But I wanted to end with these few sets of slides to talk about the process model of situations, cognitions, and emotions. Again, this is a bit textbook, but it shows us our experience when faced with challenging times, or challenge, or any situation. Basically, this is what happens in our experience. There's a trigger situation. We experience a thought, or we appraise it, and that comes with a feeling. If our thoughts add to the feeling, it tends to overwhelm it, right? And we are compelled to act, behave, and it also comes with body sensations. However, if there's a trigger situation and we are now more aware of the thought and how it contributes to that feeling, we can choose to do something about the thoughts. We can choose to challenge it or do something about what we're thinking, so we can experience a new feeling, or lessen the intensity of that negative emotion. Because if we add a thought that will not be helpful for it, or that will just make us address the situation or look at the situation as a challenge, then we will perhaps act irrationally, But if we decide to change how we appraise that situation, instead of thinking this as a difficult task, it's a challenging task. Instead of thinking that you'll never be good at it, perhaps you can say, okay, I'm not good at this yet, but I can learn. And that can help us address the situation better. And the last slide is this quote, as a single footstep will not make a path on the earth, so a single thought will not make a pathway in the mind. To make a deep physical path, we walk again and again. To make a deep mental path, we must think over and over the kind of thoughts we wish to dominate our lives. So much like those paths they make on the grass when people keep on walking at it, we also have mental grooves in our mind. And this tends to lead to depression or certain ways of behaving, even. So, to unlearn that or to remove that groove in the mind, we have to think another thought. And there's actually that physical change that happens in the brain when we learn a new skill, learn a new way of coping, learn a new way of thinking. And that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you for your time. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing and open the panel for question and answer. I think I went a bit over. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay, Miss Joey. Again, thank you for that wonderful talk, the insightful sharing. And we invite everyone in the community to open the chat box to your right. No? If you look at your screen, the Zoom screen, and you're used to Zoom meetings by now, on the right-hand side of your screen, you may opt to put your questions there. Okay? And Miss Joey will answer your queries as soon as possible. We also welcome Mr. Nong to our webinar. Good morning, Mr. Nong.
Good morning, Mr. Nan.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you for having me back.
Yes, thank you very much. And I guess just to make a comment before the questions, I really would like to thank you for the discussion you have made. I didn't realize that there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that can be done. No? And I'm glad that some of the things that I'm doing or I'm surprisingly glad that there are certain things that I'm doing that turns out to be uh, uh, sort of proven techniques, or
Yes.
or in a manner of speaking, scientific techniques
Yeah.
that allows a solution to the situations I go through, or perhaps what people go through. And it's actually quite a lot, and there are a lot of ways. And on the onset, it probably sounds confusing or sounds complicated, but on the other hand, it also tells me that, oh, there are a lot of things that I can do. There are a lot of things that somebody can do. No? People need. There are obviously a lot of ways to get out of trouble, and uh, there seems to be no excuse in being to feel helpless. No, parang we should not feel helpless, because there are many ways by which we can get ourselves out of that sense of helplessness. No? And I think this video will be viewed many times over. And I invite all our people to view this video many times over, because I think it's going to even be more helpful when you really are going through something. When you're not going through something, maybe it's, a lot of these things seems to be common sense, but
Yeah.
I think when somebody's going through something, common sense disappears, and so this video could be could very much be helpful, and we can go back to this. So anyway, Miss Joey, thank you very much. I'm relieved at one time, I'm encouraged on the other, and uh, I feel stronger right now, or at the very least, if I forget to feel strong, I know how to get it back. Please watching this video again. So thank you
Yeah.
again very much, Ms. Joey.
Thank you, sir. Um, so If there are any questions, I hope I didn't confuse you with a number of terms to everyone. But I guess teaching these things or talking about these things help because it helps us check in. Okay, this is what I do. This is
Right.
what I have been doing, and this is probably why it's helpful. Or saying, okay, I've been doing this too. This is not helpful, or I could do this too. And a lot of students would also say that yeah, parang they didn't realize they were doing those things, but later on they come back and say, okay, and now I know what they were talking about when they were teaching us these things. And I hope you guys got that same experience too, that I know it's early in the morning and it's like a lecture,
Oh,
a class. But yeah, I will share the slides, so it's something that you can go back on and read. And I hope that's even more helpful for the team.
thank you, ma'am. Actually, whenever we have discussions on psychology, it helps us revisit what we've been doing in the past to cope with our own problems and issues, right? And moving
Yeah.
forward, we can be more conscious of what techniques and process we can adapt in order to better cope with situations. No? So, ma'am, we have some questions here already that we'd like
Okay.
to share with you. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, a while ago in your talk, you mentioned acceptance and mindfulness. So, these techniques ground you to reality. It reminds you, it leads you to acknowledge the things you're in control of and the things that you are not in control of, right? So, but given our core value of excellence, of going beyond, seeking the more, uh, trying to achieve what seems impossible, how can you reconcile being mindful, being accepting, and always challenging yourself to achieve great things that seem impossible at first? No, these are two good things: mindfulness and excellence, right? Knowing what's possible, what can't be done, yet acknowledging what seems impossible but can change. No? So, how can you reconcile that, ma'am? How can you be mindful yet striving for excellence continuously?
Well, it's perhaps it's also a process that other people, the value of excellence won't be as as present in them. There would be other values, but as a culture, if it's something that we talk about and that we encourage, it's something that could be learned. And with people, I guess if it's not there yet, if being excellent is difficult because perhaps there are other things that need to be addressed or cleared, the road to excellence won't seem as evident yet because there are other experiences that are getting in the way, such as the criticism, self-criticism, thinking they're not good enough, thinking they're not doing well enough, or perhaps there are other concerns, functional concerns that are getting in the way. The practical ones like time constraints, habits, even, and we have to look at that. But first, we also have to address that it's a process. So if this is where the person is right now, um, also accept that okay, I feel overwhelmed. I feel that there's too much work, and then have someone appreciate and validate that.
Right.
If it's like a colleague, say perhaps, or a supervisor can just listen first, and that already helps. In like in Bulata or in a lot of the foundations I work with, there's always a module on listening skills and empathy because in the workplace, it's important to be able to communicate well. And when you're communicating, to feel that someone is acknowledging your experience. So when you feel heard, when you feel received by that person, you tend to become more aware, more mindful of your own experience. And that allows you to see, okay, I am not doing well in these things. But first, someone accepts that who you are without wanting to change you first. I think that experience and the excellence will follow. I do believe that. it follows.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. No? We also have another question. A while ago, you talked about situation modification and cognitive change. So these two techniques are ways to go around negative events. In many ways, it can change how the event appears, or can change our perception of the event itself. No. However, how can we keep ourselves from being carried away? This may lead us to develop a habit of making excuses or avoiding reality, framing things the way we want to see them. No? So, how do we avoid being carried away, from being stuck in that frame of mind?
I guess feedback does matter. Particularly in the work context, in the corporate context, feedback matters. And if there's respect and like proper communication and how it's told or how it's the feedback is given,
Right.
then that would be helpful. And on a personal note, if it were for the person, it's weighing the short term versus long term consequences really. Like you can avoid the situation now, the painful, heavy experience of going to work even or doing your work, but you know you need it. And I believe that engaging in a career, doing your job well is a form of self care because it allows you to feel that you're doing something productive, and it allows you to feel that you're becoming your best self, even if it's a difficult or challenging task. It's something you still engage in.
Right.
So,
And last but not least, ma'am, the question on mindfulness. So mindfulness is a way for us to be aware of the here and now, to accept the way things are, and to face the realities in a realistic and logical way. However, focusing on the here and now can sometimes be a hindrance for us to anticipate problems and to find solutions. So how can we balance having a mindful mode of mind and having a doing mode of mind?
um, it helps to be able to engage in both modes actually. Doing is what we're used to, so it's our automatic pilot. It's our automatic response. It's a mode that's our default mode. Mindfulness, however, is something we can just engage in to get more self-awareness, to engage in more self-awareness. So with certain tasks, like when you're at work, it really helps to be on the doing mode most of the time. But if you find that it's already a difficult experience, taking a break and going on being mode will be helpful, because say you're on doing mode and you're having a difficult time completing a task, perhaps going on being mode, saying, okay, this is a challenging task. I wonder why. What's going on? Why can't I finish this task that I'm supposed to do? And just clock in. Perhaps I'm still worried about something I failed to do. I left the house in a rush. The gas stove was on. I don't know if I locked the door. Perhaps there's a worry, or perhaps I had a fight with my child. And then now you can choose what you want to do. Do I want to focus on this problem, which is keeping me from doing my work productively, or can I set it aside now? But there's that conscious choosing na, okay, ito yung mga problema ko. This is what I was worried about. Ito yung mga pinagdadaanan ko. Perhaps I can put it aside and work on this. But we need to be able to acknowledge that before we mindlessly do our tasks. Perhaps.
Okay. Thank you, Miss Joey, for answering our questions. Yes, sir.
Okay.
But I actually have a question also. As those questions are being asked, more questions pop out. One of the things that was one of the things that that was discussed is actually how to have courage, and that to maintain courage, diba? We talked about self-honesty, personal responsibility, self-expression. But a lot of this obviously has something to do um, uh, with the self, right? In fact, two of the three has the word self in it, and the other one is just a synonym, personal. Diba? So it could all be just self-honesty, self-responsibility, and self-expression. And it's all about the self. Uh, how do you impart this uh, to the other person who is either the cause of the problem objectively? Objectively, and there is no bias. No, let's say I've gone through. If there's a conflict or there's a particular crisis, so what we spoke about this morning is that, okay, let's go through everything about myself, and let's get rid of all the negative feelings that we have. Let's learn from everything that is probably negative due to our own fault, and let's not be too harsh on ourselves, but let us learn, and uh, and so that in the for now we give ourselves hope because we know that we are better because we learn, and we maintain that hopefulness because we say, oh, I'm going to be better the next time around. So we've done all of this, so voila, ta-da, we're a much better person already. But that's half of the equation. The other half of the equation is this other person that whether uh, whether uh, when it's not in your control, it's no longer in your control. So that's why it's out of the self already. No? Wherein you just have to deal with this person. You have to work with this person. Some of the examples you have given a while ago are precisely such examples. Relationships within the family. No? So that is one aspect wherein um, it does not seem something that you can just simply, shy away. You cannot simply just block it off. You cannot just say, well, next time, because it's a situation that you're always going to be part of, diba? So to a situations like, or maybe in the work environment, guess what? You're really just going to be working with this particular superior officer, or that you just have to work with this staff of yours, diba? You just can fire people. You say, I hate your guts, get away from me. Or I things are not working out. I want a new boss. Diba? So these are things. It's not practical. Diba? These are similar. So one in that home's environment, one in the work environment. So I guess my question is, how do you then sort of, wherein authentically, genuinely, the other person now is is the source of the problem, right? You've solved everything on yourself, but it's really now the other person. How do you now get to that other person? How do you sort of tell that person, hey, can you be courageous naman also? Di ba? Parang ganyan. How do you go through that?
Oh wow. So the relational aspect comes into play now, and it's a bit more challenging, I believe, because this has aspects of conflict resolution and also being able to deal with difficult people. Um, Not everyone will have the same mindset. Some people will be different, and perhaps it's worth acknowledging that. I guess for me, I would either talk to that person if I really feel that it's getting in the way of productivity, because that's what we come to work for. We have to be accountable for our own tasks and responsibilities. But if that is not, but if I'm overwhelmed with emotion or I'm too upset at that person, that might not be the best time to talk to him or her. So that's when the strategies can be useful. And then communication skills would help. And in these situations, sometimes it helps to listen to what the person is going through and to just say, okay, these are the behaviors that I noticed have been keeping you from performing productively, and it makes me feel upset, or it makes me feel sad, or it makes me feel disappointed because I expected you to do better. There's there's a technique called I statement. You say, you acknowledge the emotion that it's making you feel, and that you point out the behavior that the other person is engaging in, and then you point out what you need from that person. So as a boss or as a colleague, I could say, I feel disappointed because you came to work late again, and it's been happening a lot. I need you to work better, or I need you to come to work earlier. What can we do to make this happen? So there's a statement of I acknowledging the feeling this person is making you feel, and then pointing out the behavior of the other that contributes to this. And the third would be what you need from that other person. And the last leg is saying, what can we do to do something about it? So if perhaps that person needs help, it's also acknowledging that perhaps there's something I can do to help you. And then we wait for the response. I think that that's also an important aspect of communication. Sometimes we ask or we assume, and then we forget to listen for the response. Or we listen for the response, and then if it's not something we like, we brush it off, we shrug it off, or we get mad. But if we suspend judgment after that last question, and if we say it in a way that's really more collaborative than critical, perhaps it's more helpful for our colleagues even. It's possible they don't want to talk to us because they're upset at something we did, or they have a grievance over what they're tasked to do and they can't express it well. And they need to feel, like most people, they need to feel safe, that they will be heard and acknowledged before they can be honest about what they're really going through. Does that help, sir? I'm not, but I find
Yes,
that
yes.
it helps. Yeah, the I statements help with my parents.
Okay, we will try. We will try. Now, I guess Jello will know what's the next topic.
Yes, sir.
uh, um, I guess siguro one last and I guess maybe perhaps uh, a closing question, no? Is that uh, kaya ba talaga? I mean, kaya ba ng isang tao ito na madaanan niya to uh, uh, na kaya niyang maging mas magaling, na kaya niya butihin yung sarili niya kahit ang paligid niya masamang-masama, or sitwasyon niya is yung me against the world situation, you know, pasangkong daigdig situation, right? In all honesty, because a lot of people will probably be saying to somebody like you, not necessarily you, but probably somebody like you, and they will say, ang dali mo magsalita ng ganyan, magsabi ng ganyan kasi wala ka naman sa sitwasyon ko eh, di ba? So, I guess the question here is how can we believe that, you know, all of these things obviously it's done by research. These are scientific. These are studies being made. This is not just something. Despite the fact that it does sound like ordinary language, but it does. It's coming out from research, from real honest to goodness PhD work, right?
Mhm.
So how can we be convinced? How can we really say that despite knowing all of this, how can we believe and say, oh nga, kaya talaga namin to. Kaya ko to. How you know,
Um,
kaya ba talaga? I guess that's the first question. Kaya ba talaga? Kaya ba?
I believe kaya. Honestly, I do believe kaya, but we also have to understand our own constraints and limitations. Kaya natin if you desire it for yourself, but there is very little we can do for another person who perhaps wants to stay in another space. If they want to be in a space that they're not ready to change yet, we can encourage them, but it's ultimately their choice still. And I think underlying that is also self-acceptance, another self. Rogers, one psychologist, says that the curious paradox is it is only when I accept myself as I am that I can be ready to change. So we have to come from a place na I'm here, nandito ako, nahihirapan ako, or ayoko pa gumalaw, tamad ako, pagod pa ako. And then accepting that that's where you are. And I guess if you allow yourself to be at that moment, there's more space to want to be better than that or to want to move from that. And yeah, it comes with maturity, I believe. The more we know about ourselves, the more we can engage in healthy coping skills and techniques, right? So parang there's a sense of maturity na instead of being too self-critical, now we can acknowledge our own mistakes and still do something about it. I think some people can relate with that. We learn as we go along, but first we accept. And then we also decide, I don't want to be this person anymore. I want to be someone else. But the acceptance is there. Now, okay, this is where I am. Pagod pa ako. Sometimes there's that po now. We just have to accept now, okay, this is where I am. And then move from there. If that
Yes.
helps.
Yes. I agree. I think so. And I think, unfortunately, to a lot of people, uh, uh, when they're going through a difficulty, and then they sort of calm themselves down, but at the same time, like what you said, maybe are not ready to 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 take on the next step yet, and would then therefore say, "Don't worry, at least I'm calm. I'm not going to do anything rash that will create a more compounding problem or to compound the situation as it is, right?" Um, but then I think I also observed that sometimes what happens is that we sort of stay stuck there, and sometimes the manifestation of staying stuck is actually surrendering your situation as a forever given, that forever you are going to be helpless. And the worst part is that, and sometimes people will not like that. So on the one hand, people just surrender. And then on the other hand, when they do surrender, they find out that they hate it, because then they hate the feeling of being helpless. And then they say, well, but they've sunk so down in terms of the situation and surrendered themselves almost completely. And yet they feel the unease, the anger, the frustration. What happens now is they just sort of blame other people, blame
Mm,
blame somebody else. And I guess they don't see that. It's not easily seen.
yeah.
And I guess that's a real problem that, and I look, I I observe, for example, some of my friends. No, they say like during the past elections, they would say, this guy is really good. We should really vote for this guy. And then some people goes, are you sure this guy is like this and like that? No, 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 no. He may be this and he may be that, but I tell you, this guy is like this, like this, like this, like that. Right? And then fast forward 4 years later and say, oh my God, this guy is like this and like that and like that and like that. And then the people around him will say, but wait a minute, weren't you the one who kept on insisting about this particular person? Why suddenly are you finding fault in that person? And then at that point, a lot of sentiments really is wanting to go around this person by saying, why do you find fault in that person? That person is there because of somebody exactly like you who wanted that person to be there. So shouldn't you find fault in you first? Because after all, you were the one who were talking about this the whole time. Di ba? So ganun di ba? Parang that's the problem sometimes. When well, not maybe sometimes. I think that's a general problem a lot of us get into. When we feel ourselves to be at a somewhat inferior position, when we don't feel precisely, when we don't feel the courage, when we don't feel the strength in us, somehow we feel inferior, and then somehow the next best thing we have is just to blame others, right? Where in fact, if only we were a lot braver, only if we were more courageous, that we don't have to blame others. In fact, we probably have to blame ourselves. But then again, we don't really have to blame ourselves because we could just correct ourselves because we can control ourselves anyway, right? And be a better person and avoid the wrong decisions we've made in the past by learning from it. I mean, no matter how painful the past is, it's no point surrendering to it, staying stuck with it. It's not very easy to forget, and maybe the point is not to forget it, because if you do forget it, then maybe you also forget the lesson. So I guess more importantly is fine. Don't forget, but because more importantly is don't forget the lesson that can be learned, and then go through that process of being strong and courageous.
Yeah.
Do I make sense?
Yes, sir. You actually point one word struck out earlier while you were talking about it. That being a better person. Sometimes people can't do that because they feel inferior. And that term inferior, it sort of like leads to the concept that that person does not feel safe to be themselves or to accept themselves yet. So there's little foundation for change or improvement because they're coming from a place of inferiority. Like if you notice in children, they tend to develop faster and better and more. Tend to learn things faster if they feel safe in their environment. Or they can explore more. They're more curious and adventurous if they know that they can come back to a safe space. If the adult doesn't have that foundation, and if an adult doesn't feel safe, that they won't have a safe space to be themselves, there's always a mask of indifference, perhaps, or of not wanting to change, because that would be the protective factor keeping them safe. So they have to focus their energies on that. And baka another person, if they find safety in another person or in an experience, they might it might reflect that feeling of safety might reflect now, okay, these are the things I've been doing that haven't been helpful. Pero yun nga, sir, no, it's easier said than done. It's like in research, they do it, they figure this out, but in actual practice, so many factors come into play. Awareness and the person's willingness to change even is so important.
Yes, yes, yes. I think siguro just as a last statement, and maybe for everybody also who's listening, and I think we have something like close to 80 people listening to us, and that's quite a lot. Thank you very much. I guess I'm just wanting to share a little bit of how I see things myself, especially when I go through something difficulty. I have learned that you've mentioned children. So I remember when child, I was not so inhibited. But as you said, there's a certain safe place before when you're a child, so you can veer away a little bit, and then you know that you can come back to something safe. Like, oh, at the end of the day, you still have your parents who's gonna take care of you and all of these things. But then as you get older, some of those are no longer accorded to you because now you have to sort of take responsibility for yourself. And that's where a lot of fear comes into place as opposed to courage. And
Yes.
then I think the other thing also is that we don't want, in not wanting to feel that fear, we hide it with our pride. And I think that's another compounding issue. No? Hindi ka na nga matapang, ma-pride ka pa. Di ba? So parang talagang you double down on yourself. It's a double whammy. No?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are missing out uh, are missing out the alternative of pride, which is honor. I mean, both can be very similar, but one can really drive you to a very negative path, and the other one, obviously, honor can drive you at a very positive path. Acknowledging your mistake, acknowledging your weakness, to be able to be strong again, to be able to be courageous, to be able to do what is right next time. That definitely sounds honorable, as opposed to not wanting just because of your pride, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know who I don't know who in this world was admired because he was proud, di ba? I mean,
Yeah.
let's think of all the people that we regard as heroes, that we look up to. It's it's very difficult to see these people as being very proud or very prideful. And chances are you would actually regard them to be quite honorable people. Diba? So I guess uh, to us, to the rest of Joy Nostalg, to all of us in Joy Nostalg, especially that we are facing a very challenging, difficult situation, totally unprecedented. I guess this is a great time to practice courage. Kasi wala na talagang mas gagaling pa. Everybody's first time ito eh, di ba?
Yes.
Nobody currently in the world ever experienced something like this. No, unless that person was born in 1918 and is still alive right now and still,
Manage.
you know, that is still very much uh, cognitively uh, active. di ba?
Yeah.
So yun.
That's
So I guess maybe perhaps as a closing remark, I definitely would like to thank you, Miss Joey. I'd like to ask everybody here to continue reviewing this video from time to time. Please encourage everybody else who has not attended, who was not able to attend this session to watch this video. And as I said, let's all drop our fears. Let's throw them away. Let's start wearing courage. Let's at the same time throw away pride, and instead let's adapt to be honorable. I guess these are the ways by which we can excel and uh, uh, and be able to define ourselves successfully in a situation that is actually very dire. You know? So, and every step along the way, whatever rocky road we come to, well, we have Miss Joey teaching us, telling us all of these things on how we can how you can cope in the short term to become better in the long term. So with
yeah.
that, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm learning along the way as well. On behalf of Bulato Center, thank you for having us. I hope you have a good day, everyone. Thank you, Sir Jack, Jello, and
Thank you, Miss
everyone
Jovi,
else.
again. So everyone, we will post the link on on the video this afternoon. So wait for that, and please don't forget to share it with your colleagues who weren't able to join us this morning. So once again, ma'am, in behalf of Joy Nostalg, thank you very much, ma'am. We'll see you again
Thank
on
you.
July 15, next Wednesday. So have a
Yes.
great day, everyone. Thank you,
All
sir. Thank
right.
you, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye,
Goodbye.
everyone.